It was 2:03 a.m. when the sound of a whisper sliced through my sleep. At first, I thought it was a dream, that low murmur people make when they talk in their sleep. But the voice beside me was too deliberate, too careful. I opened my eyes to the faint blue glow of his phone screen. My husband's back was turned, his shoulders stiff under the dim light filtering through the curtains. "Yeah, I miss you too," he whispered, barely audible. My heart froze. There are moments when the world stops spinning, when even time feels afraid to move forward. I didn't want to hear another word, but my body refused to move. The voice on the other end was muffled, distorted by distance, but then I heard it. That laugh. Polished, confident, the kind that fills boardrooms and silences subordinates. It was her, his boss. The woman everyone admired, the one with sharp heels, sharper words, and the reputation for turning ordinary men into corporate stars. I'd met her twice. Once at the company party where she praised my cooking, and again at a charity auction where she'd touched my husband's arm a moment too long while saying, "He's got potential." I had smiled through it then, naive enough to take it as professional pride. But that night the tone was different. Personal. Intimate. Then came the words that would hollow out my chest. "He's mine." She said it with the ease of someone claiming what was rightfully hers. No hesitation, no guilt. Just ownership. I didn't move, not even to breathe. I let the phone call finish, the quiet murmurs fading into an artificial good night. When he slipped the phone onto the nightstand and turned to face me, I shut my eyes and slowed my breathing until I could mimic sleep. He brushed a strand of hair from my forehead, the same way he always did before leaving for work. The gesture should have been comforting, but it burned. The touch of betrayal wrapped in familiarity. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to demand how long mine had replaced ours. But instead, I lay there still. Because instinct told me something important. This wasn't the night to react. This was the night to remember. I counted the seconds until his breathing evened out, until I knew he was asleep. Only then did I open my eyes again. The clock on the bedside table blinked 2:21 a.m. The room looked unchanged. The same curtains, the same bedside lamp, the same scent of his cologne. Yet everything was different. It was as if the floor had shifted beneath the bed, as if reality itself had tilted. I turned my head and looked at him. His face was peaceful, almost boyish in sleep. It was hard to reconcile that face with the voice I'd heard moments ago. I traced the outline of his jaw with my eyes. Familiar, comforting, deceitful. My heart didn't know whether to ache or harden. When the tears came, they were silent, landing one by one on the pillow, until it felt like I was drowning quietly beside the man I thought I knew. It's strange. The things you remember in betrayal. The way the clock glows. The way the night air smells faintly of rain. The way your heart whispers, "Don't wake him yet. Not like this." I pressed my palms together under the blanket, the way I used to pray as a child. But no words came. Just a strange calm. A fragile, dangerous calm. Because even in the chaos, something inside me began to rearrange, a shift so quiet it almost felt like acceptance. But it wasn't acceptance. It was strategy being born. I memorized the sound of her voice, the cadence of his replies, the timestamp, every detail. If she thought "he's mine" was the end of my story, she was wrong. At 2:45 a.m., he turned in his sleep, his arm draping over me. My body stiffened, but I didn't move away. Let him think nothing had changed. Let him think I was still asleep, still devoted, still blind. Tomorrow, I would make breakfast as usual, smile as usual, pretend as usual. But tonight, this silent, sleepless night, I buried the version of me who lived for love and loyalty. When the dawn began to bleed into the curtains, I was still awake, still staring at the ceiling, still hearing her voice. "He's mine," she'd said. I whispered back into the empty air, my voice steady and low. "No, not for long. We weren't always this way. Strangers sharing a bed." There was a time when his laughter could light up a room, and my dreams wrapped themselves around his. Back then, love was simple. Messy, but simple. We didn't have much. A one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of instant noodles and cheap detergent. But we had each other, and that felt infinite. I still remember the first night we moved in. We sat on the cold floor, eating takeout straight from the containers because we couldn't afford plates yet. He had his arm around me, promising, "One day, you won't have to worry about anything. I'll make sure of it." And I believed him, not because he was convincing, but because I wanted to believe. We built our life like people build a dream home, brick by fragile brick. I worked double shifts at the clinic while he chased promotions that always seemed one corner away. I cooked, saved, encouraged, and clapped for every small win as if it were a championship. Love, I thought, was built on sacrifice, and I was proud to give mine. When he was rejected from his third job interview, he came home broken. I held him until his shoulders stopped shaking, whispering that failure was temporary. When his car broke down and he couldn't afford repairs, I sold my engagement ring to cover the bill. "It's just a ring," I'd said, smiling. "We'll buy another when things get better." He kissed my forehead and said, "You're my miracle." I didn't realize then that miracles fade when people stop believing in them. Years passed, and slowly, things did get better. He found a position at a promising firm, one led by a woman known for her brilliance and her ruthlessness. She was everything I wasn't: sharp, confident, untouchable. While I lived in quiet devotion, she thrived on power and ambition. Still, I admired her from afar. I told myself that if she could see potential in my husband, then maybe his success was finally within reach. Her name was Clara Winslow. The first time he mentioned her, it was casual. My boss said I did great in the meeting today, but soon, her name slipped into every conversation. Clara thinks I could handle the new project. Clara said my presentation was the best. Clara believes I'm ready for promotion. I told myself it was normal, admiration between mentor and mentee. After all, she was known for sculpting ordinary employees into executives. I was proud of him, proud that someone finally recognized the potential I had seen for years. When he got his promotion, we celebrated. He took me to the restaurant we couldn't afford before, ordered champagne, and toasted to the future. I looked across the table and saw the man I'd fallen in love with. The same grin, the same spark. Everything felt worth it again. All those nights of overtime, all the patience, all the unspoken fears, they had led here. But slowly, the celebration turned into distance. He started working late. "Clara needs me to go over reports," he'd say. Or, "Clara wants me at the conference this weekend." I didn't argue. I'd been his supporter for so long that I didn't know how to be anything else. I reminded myself that ambition demanded sacrifice, that this was just another test of faith. I ironed his shirts, packed his lunches, and kept the home warm for a man who barely came home to it. I learned to fall asleep alone to the sound of the ticking clock, telling myself love was patience. Love was trust. Love was giving, even when you were empty. But the truth was quieter and crueler. Love, when one-sided, becomes an illusion you build to protect yourself. It wasn't until that night, the 2 a.m. call, that the illusion cracked. One sentence from her, and everything I had believed dissolved into ash. All the sacrifices, all the blind loyalty, they weren't unseen acts of devotion. They were currency I had spent on someone else's ambition. As I lay awake after that call, staring at the ceiling, the memories replayed like a cruel movie. Him laughing with me in that cramped apartment, his head resting on my shoulder after a long day. The promise that we'll make it together. And now, knowing that the very woman who helped him make it was the same one who claimed him as hers, it all felt like a joke. A cosmic one. They called her his mentor. Maybe she was. But I couldn't help wondering if she taught him how to climb by stepping over the woman who once held him up. The illusion of our perfect love shattered that night. But what neither of them knew was that beneath the shards, something sharp had awakened in me, something that didn't break quietly. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. That paranoia was just the bruise left behind by that 2 a.m. phone call. But once you've heard another woman's voice claim what's yours, you start noticing every whisper, every gesture, every shift of tone. So I started watching, quietly, carefully, the way you study a storm before it breaks. The first company gala came a month later. I spent an hour picking a dress that made me feel confident again. When we arrived, he looked uncomfortable, as if I didn't belong there. Clara Winslow, in her shimmering navy gown, glided through the room like a queen inspecting her court. When her eyes landed on me, I saw it. That faint, polite smile that says, "Oh, so this is the wife." During the speeches, she placed her hand on my husband's shoulder, just lightly, the way someone might touch a prized trophy. He didn't flinch. When she leaned in to whisper something, he laughed softly, the kind of laugh he hadn't given me in months. Around them, people noticed. Some smirked. Others pretended not to. I just sipped my wine, pretending I didn't. From that night on, I made it my mission to understand her. Not as his boss, but as the woman who had managed to make me invisible. Clara was everything the world rewards: elegant, decisive, untouchable. She owned 3 companies, sat on charity, boards, and vacationed in Italy like it was her backyard. Her home was featured in a business magazine, a marble paradise for a woman who had succeeded without compromise. She was also divorced, childless, and rumored to have destroyed 2 competitors by poaching their best men. Figuratively, of course. I started collecting details like evidence. The restaurant receipts that didn't match his calendar. The late-night calls logged under urgent project. The faint trace of perfume on his blazer. Not floral, but something sharp and expensive. But more than the clues, it was the pattern that disturbed me. Every time she praised him, his eyes shone with devotion. Every time she belittled him, he worked twice as hard. She dangled validation like bait, and he chased it with blind loyalty. One evening, I attended a small company dinner, an event spouses weren't usually invited to. I insisted on coming. Clara welcomed me with her trademark warmth, her smile almost too smooth. "You must be the reason he's so focused," she said, her tone sweet, but her gaze assessing. "It's wonderful when a man has stability at home." The women at the table laughed politely. My husband squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea not to react. And I didn't. I smiled right back and said, "Yes, it's true. I make sure he's always ready for work." For the rest of the evening, she watched me. Not with jealousy, but with curiosity, like a scientist studying a subject she didn't quite understand. When we left, I caught her whispering something to him as she brushed past. He smiled, shyly, almost submissively. It hit me then. She didn't just control him professionally. She owned him emotionally. That night, as I lay beside him in bed, pretending to sleep, I realized this wasn't an affair in the usual sense. It was about power. She didn't love him. She possessed him. And he, so desperate to feel significant, had surrendered everything for that feeling. I didn't cry that night. I didn't confront him. I just watched the ceiling, thinking of all the years I spent building a man someone else now paraded as her masterpiece. But as I observed their world, the hierarchy, the manipulation, the quiet cruelty behind those polished smiles, I also began to see something else. Weakness. Clara's power wasn't infinite. It depended on admiration, on being untouchable. And if I wanted revenge, I had to find the one thing she couldn't control: what people thought of her. I was done being the quiet wife. From that night on, I was the audience she didn't know was watching. And soon, I'd be the one rewriting her final act. I tried to talk to him gently at first. One evening, while he was eating dinner in silence, I said, "You've been spending a lot of time with Clara lately." My tone was careful, non-accusatory. I wanted understanding, not conflict. But he didn't even look up from his plate. "She's my boss," he said flatly. "Do you expect me to quit my job because you're feeling insecure?" Insecure. That word hit harder than any insult. I tried again, explaining that I wasn't jealous, just uneasy. He sighed, setting his fork down with exaggerated patience. "You're imagining things. You always overthink. Clara's been good to me, to us. Why can't you just be happy?" I forced a smile. "Of course," I whispered, even as something inside me cracked. That night, I lay awake listening to him snore beside me, wondering when my concern had become a character flaw. The charity gala came soon after. Clara's idea, of course. "Bring your lovely wife," she'd said on the phone, her voice honeyed and insincere. "I'd love to meet her again. It'll be a wonderful evening." Wonderful for whom, I wondered. When we arrived, photographers flashed their cameras, capturing the city's most powerful faces. I felt out of place, a ghost in a borrowed gown. Clara was radiant, surrounded by people who orbited her like planets around a sun. When she saw us, she extended both arms, smiling as if we were long-lost friends. "You look stunning," she told me, her eyes scanning my simple dress before lingering on my shoes. It's refreshing to see someone who doesn't need labels to feel beautiful. I recognized the venom wrapped in silk. Throughout the evening, she made sure I felt small, always with a laugh, always disguised as kindness. "You must be so proud of your husband," she said loudly at one point, her hand resting possessively on his arm. "He's truly blossomed under pressure. Not every man can handle my expectations." People around us chuckled knowingly. My husband smiled awkwardly, not defending me, not distancing himself, just complicit. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat and smiled tightly. "He's always been talented," I said. "I'm glad he finally has a boss who recognizes it." For a brief second, her eyes hardened. Then the charm returned. "Oh, we do make quite the team," she purred. It was all theater, every gesture, every word meant to push me off balance, and I played my part well. The devoted wife who didn't flinch. Inside, though, I was shaking. I wasn't sure what hurt more, her cruelty or his silence. Later, as the night drew to a close, Clara raised her glass in a toast. "To ambition," she said, her eyes locking on mine, "and to the women who support it from behind the curtain." Laughter rippled through the room. My husband looked down at his drink. No one noticed the way my fingers tightened around my glass until it almost shattered. On the drive home, he said, "You were quiet tonight." I stared out the window. Maybe I didn't have much to say. He exhaled sharply. "You can't keep doing this, seeing things that aren't there." Clara was just being nice. Nice. That word twisted in my gut. "She humiliated me," I whispered. He scoffed. "No one humiliated you. You're just too sensitive." And there it was, the final layer of gaslight. He didn't just believe her. He helped her rewrite my reality. When we reached home, he kissed my forehead mechanically and went straight to bed. I stayed in the living room, the glow of the city spilling through the curtains, watching the reflection of a woman I barely recognized. They wanted me to doubt myself, to question what I'd seen, what I'd felt. But beneath the confusion, something solid began to form. A quiet, cold clarity. If they were turning this into a game, they had underestimated me. Because while they played with lies, I had begun collecting truths. And truth, when used correctly, can burn far longer than any affair ever could. For days after the gala, I moved like a ghost through our apartment. Every corner whispered reminders. The suit he'd worn, the perfume that wasn't mine lingering on his collar. But instead of breaking down, something in me shifted. Pain hardened into resolve. If I couldn't confront them yet, I would evolve quietly, in the shadows they ignored. I started waking up before dawn, slipping into the study while he slept. I reopened old files, reconnected with colleagues I'd once mentored, brushed up on certifications I'd let expire. My mind, long dulled by domestic routines, began to sharpen again. Each new skill felt like reclaiming a fragment of myself he'd forgotten existed. When he left for work, I'd log into online meetings, offering consulting advice to small businesses that still valued integrity. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The independence grounded me. I no longer waited for validation. I built it. One afternoon, over coffee with an old friend, someone still in the corporate world, I mentioned my husband's company in passing. Her eyes narrowed. "You mean Clarion Dynamics?" she said cautiously. "They're under quiet review. Labor disputes, questionable procurement deals. People are scared to speak up, but everyone knows something's off." My pulse quickened. The same company that treated my husband like a golden boy, the same boss who called him hers, was rotting beneath the surface. That night, while he laughed over dinner about office politics, I asked innocent questions. "Do people ever complain about management?" He shrugged. "People complain everywhere. Clara just runs a tight ship. Tight, ruthless, corrupt." The puzzle began fitting together, so I began documenting, subtly, carefully. I noted dates, contracts he mentioned, things left open on his laptop. I learned to screenshot discreetly, to forward documents to a secure folder. I never snooped for gossip. I hunted for patterns. It wasn't revenge yet. It was preparation. Weeks passed, and my part-time consulting started paying off. A client offered me a larger project. My confidence grew. I started dressing differently, holding myself taller. When he noticed, he smirked. "Someone's feeling herself lately," he teased. "Yes," I said simply. "Someone is," he laughed, oblivious. That was fine. Let him underestimate me. Everyone else did too. That was my advantage. My friend continued feeding me quiet whispers. Overworked staff signing illegal NDAs, fake reports to shareholders, bonuses traded for silence. I verified what I could, connecting threads he couldn't imagine I'd notice. It wasn't about destroying him. Not yet. It was about truth, about reclaiming control from the woman who thought she owned him, and from the man who thought I'd always stay small. By the time Clara announced a new expansion project on social media, I already knew the numbers didn't add up. The empire she flaunted so boldly was built on deception, and I was holding the first loose thread. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. I had stopped reacting and started strategizing. They believed they were playing a game of power, but I had just changed the rules. It happened by accident. Or maybe fate was finally tired of watching me suffer in silence. It was close to midnight when I walked into the living room and saw his laptop glowing faintly on the couch. He'd fallen asleep in front of the TV, a half-empty glass of whiskey beside him. For a moment I hesitated. I wasn't the kind of woman who snooped. But then I remembered Clara's hand on his arm, her smirk, her toast to the women behind the curtain, and I sat down. The screen was unlocked. His inbox was open. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it echo through the quiet room. I told myself I'd only look for reassurance, proof that my suspicions were wrong. But what I found instead was confirmation far darker than infidelity, emails, chains of them. Clara's name at the top, her words clipped and commanding. Make sure these numbers are cleared by tomorrow. Sign under your authority. The board doesn't need to see preliminary expenses. Trust me. Daniel, this will look clean on your report. And his replies, short, compliant, fearful. Understood. Done. Consider it handled. My stomach turned. They weren't just sharing secrets. They were sharing crimes. I scrolled deeper. Hidden attachments, financial statements, contract bids, altered timesheets. Some documents were stamped confidential, but the edits, the forged approvals, were unmistakable. She was using him as her shield. If the truth surfaced, he'd take the fall while she remained untouched. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. The betrayal had grown beyond marriage. This wasn't just emotional, it was moral, and in that quiet, I realized something had shifted inside me. The grief that once consumed me had burned away, leaving behind something sharper. Purpose. I plugged in a small flash drive, hands trembling but steady enough to click. I didn't copy everything, just the ones that mattered. The threads that could unravel everything. Then I opened my email, created a new folder under a bland alias, and sent each file to myself with vague subject lines. Invoice. Schedule update. Vendor list. Nothing suspicious. Nothing loud. Just quiet steps in the dark. Every click felt like reclaiming my power, one bite at a time. When I finished, I sat back, staring at the soft light reflecting off the screen. My husband shifted in his sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. I studied his face. The man I'd once admired, now a willing accomplice in something vile. I should have felt anger, maybe disgust. But instead I felt calm, ice-cold calm, because now for the first time I wasn't guessing. I wasn't doubting myself or being told I was too sensitive. I had proof, and proof was freedom. I closed the laptop carefully, setting it back exactly as it was. The clock read 2:47 a.m., the same hour Clara had once claimed him with her voice. How poetic, I thought, that her empire's undoing would begin at the same hour she thought she'd won. In the days that followed, I acted normal. I made breakfast, smiled when required, played the part perfectly. But beneath the surface, I was building an archive. Dates, signatures, inconsistencies, everything linking back to her. I even reached out to a contact in corporate law through my consulting network, framing my questions hypothetically. The response was cautious but telling. If what you're describing is real, someone's committing corporate fraud. Someone. I already knew their names. Every night after he fell asleep, I'd check for updates. Subtle new commands, hidden approvals. Clara was getting bolder, maybe even careless. Power makes people arrogant, and arrogance blinds them to quiet observers. E, however, saw everything. The woman they thought was naive, emotional, replaceable. She was now the keeper of their truth. And as I watched them build higher, I began to wonder, how loud would the crash sound when the foundation finally gave way? Because someday soon it would, and when it did, I'd be standing in the quiet, holding the matches. The promotion came wrapped like a gift, glossy, impressive, too good to question. Clara had announced it during a team dinner, her voice carrying just loud enough for everyone to hear. Daniel's leadership has been invaluable, she said, resting her hand on his shoulder. I'm considering him for executive director. Applause followed. My husband smiled, but I saw the tightness around his mouth, the flicker of unease in his eyes. He wasn't ready for applause. He was being cornered. At home, he was restless. The phone calls multiplied. Clara's name appeared on his screen late at night, and each time he stepped outside to answer, the distance between us grew thicker. When I asked if he was okay, he snapped, "You wouldn't understand." "It's complicated." I didn't argue. I knew what complicated meant. It meant Clara was pulling his strings, and he was tangled enough to believe she held his future. A week later, I overheard one of their conversations by accident. He'd left the door cracked during a call, his voice low and defeated. I just need time to think, he said. Then came her reply, sharp, cutting. Daniel, people who hesitate lose everything. You owe your success to me. Don't forget who built you. Her words sliced through the air, arrogant and poisonous. And for the first time, I didn't just feel anger. I felt pity. He wasn't her partner. He was her pawn. That night, he came home late. He didn't kiss me. He didn't even remove his shoes before collapsing onto the couch. I watched him in silence, noticing the way his hands trembled when he loosened his tie. Did she threaten you? I asked softly. His head jerked up. What are you talking about? You know what I mean. He hesitated, just for a second, and before looking away. She controls everything, he whispered. If I walk away now, I lose everything I've worked for. Everything she built, I thought. Everything she convinced him he couldn't survive without. In that moment, I saw it clearly. He was trapped in the same web that had once ensnared me. Manipulation disguised as mentorship, dependency dressed as gratitude. He had sold his freedom for approval, and she was about to collect payment in full. I didn't hate him anymore. Not exactly. I hated what she had turned him into. A man so fearful of losing power that he couldn't see how little he had left. That night, as he slept, I sat in the dark, scrolling through the folder of evidence I'd gathered. Each file was a brick in the tower Clara had built for herself, and each one now sat in my control. But revenge, I realized, couldn't just be about exposure. It had to mean liberation. For him, for the others she'd crushed, even for me. If I went public recklessly, he'd be destroyed alongside her. If I stayed silent, she'd keep winning. So I needed precision, a plan not just to ruin her, but to dismantle the illusion she lived behind. I thought of her voice on that first night, soft and possessive. He's mine. No, I decided. He never was. By dawn, I had already drafted my next move, the one that would turn her empire against her. It was time to stop collecting proof. It was time to use it. It's strange how peace can feel like a mask. On the surface, everything seemed normal again. I made breakfast, watered the plants, laughed at his stories about work. He believed I'd finally let go of my suspicions, that the quiet meant surrender. He didn't realize it was strategy. Silence used as armor. I had already begun my real work. Through one of my consulting clients, I was introduced to Lydia, an investigative journalist who specialized in corporate misconduct. Sharp, discreet, and quietly relentless. Over coffee, I told her just enough to pique her curiosity. Hypothetically, I said, if a company was falsifying financials and coercing employees into signing NDAs, how long before it caught up to them? Her eyes gleamed. Depends on who's watching. When I slid a single redacted document across the table, her professionalism faltered for a moment. You're not exaggerating, she murmured. This is real. That was the beginning. Lydia became my silent ally, helping me shape the evidence into something solid. Timelines, transaction trails, testimonies. Every exchange was cautious, encrypted, layered with plausible deniability. She didn't ask how I got the files. I didn't tell her. At the same time, I reached out to someone inside the company. Maya, an HR specialist who'd once vented to me at a holiday party. I remembered her saying, Clara treats employees like chess pieces, useful until broken. When I contacted her again, she didn't hesitate. I've been waiting for someone to take her down, she said quietly. Maya started feeding me internal memos and staff complaints that had been buried by Clara's selective management. Each piece painted a clearer picture, a company sustained by fear and silence. Together, we crafted a timeline. First, the internal audit leak, subtle enough to raise questions without naming names. Then, Lydia's article, timed to coincide with the financial quarter's public release. Finally, the legal trigger, the submission of whistleblower documents under Maya's protection clause. It was surgical, controlled, devastating. At home, I maintained the illusion. I cooked his favorite meals, asked about his projects, even complimented Clara's brilliant leadership when he mentioned her. His shoulders relaxed. He thought I was healing. I let him think that. It kept him from looking too closely. Each night, While he watched television, I drafted emails, cross-referenced statements, secured cloud backups. My heartbeat had learned to steady itself under pressure. The fear that once paralyzed me now sharpened my focus. The tension was unbearable, but I wore it like perfume. Invisible. Intoxicating, undetectable. One evening, he told me Clara had finalized his promotion. "She said the board just needs to sign off," he said, almost smiling. I nodded. "That's wonderful." Inside, I counted days. The audit leak was scheduled for Friday. Lydia's article would publish Sunday morning. He looked at me curiously. "You're not angry anymore?" I met his gaze and smiled softly. "No, I'm just tired of being angry." He believed me. He wanted to. That night, as he drifted to sleep, I stood by the window watching city lights shimmer like distant fires. I wondered if Clara felt invincible in her penthouse, surrounded by power she'd stolen. People like her always did, until someone lit the first match. I thought about how revenge used to mean screaming, confrontation, exposure. But this was something quieter. Revenge disguised as patience, precision, grace. By Thursday, everything was in motion. Lydia confirmed the editor's green light. Maya had arranged for the compliance officer's anonymous statement to coincide with the story's release. All I had to do now was wait, and waiting, I realized, was its own kind of power. Because while Clara and my husband slept soundly in their illusions, I was already awake, watching the storm roll in, calm and ready to let it rain. The ballroom glittered like a cathedral of ambition, chandeliers sparkling above polished marble, laughter and champagne flowing like currency. I wasn't on the guest list, of course. My husband hadn't invited me, and Clara certainly wouldn't have. But I came anyway. Dressed in black silk that caught the light like liquid shadow, I moved through the crowd as though I belonged there. I'd rehearsed this entrance in my mind for weeks. Calm, silent, untouchable. The company's annual gala was Clara's kingdom, her temple of control. Every year she curated it to perfection. Gold accents, floral walls, and the illusion of generosity masking corruption. This year she was celebrating record-breaking growth. Ironically, it was built on falsified reports I had quietly exposed. My husband spotted me first. His face paled, confusion flickering behind his professional smile. He started toward me, but I raised a single hand, a subtle gesture that stopped him mid-step. For once, I didn't need to explain myself. Clara took the stage moments later. She was radiant under the lights, sleek white gown, diamond cuff, that same predatory smile I'd seen at every event before. "Tonight," she began, her voice smooth as silk, "we celebrate innovation, resilience, and the people who make this company extraordinary." The applause was automatic. I stood near the back, expression neutral, fingers resting lightly on a champagne flute. In my other hand was a small ivory envelope, sealed, precise, and meaningless now, a symbol of everything she'd underestimated. Inside was the evidence she'd buried for years, but I didn't need to hand it to anyone. The truth had already been released. As she continued her speech, I watched the ripple move through the room. It started small, a few people checking their phones, faces tightening. Then came the whispers, the sudden gasps, the glow of dozens of screens lighting up simultaneously. The exposé had gone live. Lydia's article was front page on every major business outlet. Inside the empire of lies, fraud, favoritism, and fear at Clara Holdings. The documents, the emails, the falsified audits, all attached, verified. Public, Clara's voice faltered mid-sentence. Her practiced poise slipped for the first time. What's happening?" she murmured into the mic, her gaze darting across the audience as murmurs swelled into chaos. Executives were leaving their tables, whispering urgently. Cameras were already rolling. Her PR director tried to approach her, but she shoved him away, her expression morphing from confusion to fury. "Turn that off!" she snapped at the crew. I didn't move. I wanted her to see me, to understand who had been watching all along. When her eyes finally found me across the room, the realization hit like lightning. She froze. For a brief, exquisite moment, The entire illusion of her dominance cracked open. My husband turned toward me, disbelief written all over his face. He glanced down at his phone, then back at Clara. The headline must have been burning through him too. Executive fraud tied to forged financial approvals. His signature was there, but so was proof that he'd been manipulated into it. He looked at me then, really looked, and something inside him broke. Clara tried to regain control, grabbing the microphone again. This is an attack," she shouted. "These are fabrications from disgruntled employees." But her voice was drowned by the buzz of journalists, the hum of live streaming devices, the relentless truth spilling faster than she could deny it. Security entered quietly from the back, conferring with board members whose faces were white as paper. A man from the legal department whispered something in her ear. Her expression twisted. The fight drained from her all at once. I set my glass down, walked slowly toward the stage. My heels clicked like punctuation against marble. Every step was deliberate, steady, not vengeance, but closure. When I reached her, she was trembling. The crowd had gone eerily quiet, everyone pretending not to stare. I leaned close enough that only she could hear me. "You built your empire on other people's silence," I said softly. "It's poetic that the noise destroys you." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned to leave, the envelope still in my hand. I slipped it onto the nearest table as I passed, unnecessary now but symbolic, a relic of her undone power. As I walked out, I caught one final glimpse over my shoulder. The woman who had once looked untouchable was standing alone under the glare of stage lights, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her legacy collapsing in real time. Outside, the night air felt cold and alive. My husband followed a few steps behind, but neither of us spoke. The silence between us was no longer full of lies, just truth, raw and uncomfortable. I took a deep breath, lifted my chin, and walked toward the waiting car. Behind me, the music had stopped. The laughter was gone, and for the first time in years, so was Clara's control. The morning after the gala felt strangely quiet. No alarms, no hurried footsteps, no hushed calls behind closed doors. Just sunlight seeping through the curtains, indifferent to what had burned down the night before. My husband sat at the kitchen table, still in the same wrinkled shirt from the event, staring blankly at his phone. The world had already moved. News outlets were dissecting Clara's fall. Board members were issuing statements, and legal teams were circling like vultures. I poured myself coffee, steady hands, calm breath. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. By noon, the call came. He'd been fired. Not escorted out in disgrace, but released quietly, with a mutual separation statement the company crafted to save face. My evidence had made sure of that. The time-stamped emails, the coerced approvals, the chain of manipulation proving he wasn't a willing accomplice. It was enough to protect him, not from shame, but from ruin. He didn't thank me. He couldn't. Guilt has its own silence, heavier than any apology. Meanwhile, Clara's empire crumbled fast. Her resignation was announced within 48 hours, wrapped in PR language about stepping back for personal reasons. But the investigation leaked faster than her lawyers could control it. The government's fraud division seized her accounts. Sponsors withdrew, and every publication that once celebrated her power now printed her downfall with relish. Her name became shorthand for corruption, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and business schools. Sometimes I wondered if she read the articles, or if she shut herself away somewhere, clinging to the delusion that she'd been betrayed. But that wasn't my story to finish. My chapter with her ended the moment I walked out of that ballroom. I didn't seek revenge anymore. I'd already reclaimed something far more powerful: peace. In the following months, I rebuilt quietly. The journalist's piece opened doors I hadn't expected. Companies reached out, seeking consultants who understood integrity and crisis navigation. I accepted selectively, choosing projects that aligned with my principles. My name began circulating in circles that once wouldn't have noticed me. Irony, perhaps. I'd become exactly what Clara pretended to be. Respected, composed, untouchable. At home, things were quieter too. My husband tried to rebuild in his own way. Therapy, small freelance projects, attempts at conversation that hovered like fragile truce offerings. I didn't shut him out, but I didn't rush forgiveness either. We existed in a new kind of truth, stripped of illusion, but strangely honest. One evening, as I packed my laptop for a client meeting, he looked up and said softly, "You didn't destroy her." "You just revealed who she was," I paused. That's all I ever needed to do. There was no satisfaction in her fall, only symmetry. The same system she exploited had devoured her in the end. I'd simply pulled back the curtain and let the light in. Months later, I walked past the company's old headquarters. The logo had been removed, the lobby under renovation, the empire she built dismantled brick by brick. I didn't stop to look. I just kept walking, confident, unburdened, free. That night, I opened my new firm's website draft. At the top, under my name, I wrote a single line, "Power built on deceit always collapses, but truth, even whispered, endures." The world had moved on from Clara. So had I. But the quiet strength that grew from her chaos, that would last far longer than her legacy ever did. It was raining the night he finally spoke. The kind of slow, steady rain that fills the silence between people who have run out of excuses. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where so many lies had once lived, and he looked smaller somehow, as if the truth had already begun to hollow him out. "I need to tell you everything," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "Not because you don't already know, but because I can't breathe holding it anymore." I didn't move. I just nodded. He started from the beginning. The long hours, the admiration, the blurred lines that turned into stolen moments. How Clara made him feel seen, how he mistook manipulation for affection. "She said I was the only one who understood her," he whispered, a bitter laugh catching in his throat. And I believed her. I thought I was powerful, but I was just her proof of control. His words spilled faster then. Confessions, regrets, fragments of a conscience too long ignored. When he described the moment he realized she'd never cared for him, only for obedience, his voice cracked. "I wanted to come clean months ago, but I was afraid you'd hate me." I looked at him. This man who had once been my safe place, now undone by his own choices. "I did," I said softly. "But then I stopped." He blinked, confused. "Stopped?" "I stopped wasting my hate on something that already destroyed itself." Tears gathered in his eyes. "You were right to leave me." "I didn't leave you," I replied. "You left us, the moment you chose her over honesty." We sat in silence after that. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the windows, washing the world clean in its rhythm. I thought of the woman I used to be, desperate to be chosen, terrified of being forgotten. And I thought of the woman I had become, steady, whole, unafraid. He reached across the table, his hand trembling. "Can you ever forgive me?" I met his gaze. "Forgiveness isn't the same as coming back," I said. "It's not something I give to you. It's something I give to myself, so I can finally walk away without carrying you with me." His face broke. The quiet sob of a man realizing he had lost more than a marriage. He had lost the version of himself that love had once believed in. I stood, gathering my things. "You always thought silence was weakness," I told him. "But it was my sharpest weapon. It's what made the world finally hear me." He nodded, defeated. "You deserved better than me." "I found better," I said gently. "I found peace." When I stepped outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. The city lights shimmered across the wet pavement, and for the first time in years the air felt light. Behind me, the door closed softly, not with anger, but with finality. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the quiet echo of closure, not as an ending, but as freedom. 6 months later, I sit in an office that smells of coffee, fresh paint, and quiet triumph. Sunlight spills across my desk, catching the edges of framed client contracts. each one earned, not gifted. My name gleams on the frosted glass door, Sora Ellis Consulting. It still feels surreal sometimes, seeing my name where his used to stand beside hers. The company started small. One client, one laptop, one promise to myself. Never again would my worth depend on someone else's recognition. Word spread fast. People wanted integrity, not intimidation. By the third month, I had a team. Honest, hungry professionals who believed in decency more than dominance. I never once raised my voice, but somehow I was heard more than ever before. That morning, the mail arrived in a neat stack. Contracts, invoices, a glossy magazine, and an envelope with no return address. I almost ignored it, but something about its heavy paper made me pause. Inside was a newspaper clipping. Clara Holdings officially dissolved, pending investigations into financial misconduct. No note. No signature, just that single line. I read it twice, then folded it carefully, my fingers tracing the words that once would have felt like victory. Now they felt like closure. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the city faint through the window. Clara had built an empire on control, charming the powerful, crushing the loyal, pretending invincibility could replace humanity. She thought power meant possession, that the louder you spoke, the more the world would listen. But noise fades. It always does. Real power, I've learned, is quiet. It's in restraint when you could destroy. It's in walking away when revenge begs you to stay. It's in the calm voice that says, I don't need to prove anything anymore. Sometimes I still think of my husband, of his apology, his hollow smile, the way he finally understood what love without respect becomes. We don't speak, but I know he's trying to rebuild. I wish him peace, nothing more. I've stopped measuring my healing by his regret. The world outside my window glows gold as the day wanes. My assistant knocks softly, reminding me of a client meeting. I nod, slipping the clipping into a drawer. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Endings don't always need applause. Sometimes they just need stillness. Before I leave, I glance at my reflection in the glass. Not the broken woman from that night, not the shadow of someone's ambition, but a woman who found strength in silence and rebuilt from the wreckage without vengeance consuming her. Clara's legacy ended with noise and scandal. Mine began with calm. She screamed her power into existence. I built mine in quiet, and it echoed louder than she ever imagined. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Power isn't possession, and revenge isn't about screams or spectacle. It's patience. It's observation. It's knowing when to strike, and, more importantly, when to wait. In the weeks and months that followed Clara's fall, I realized that my quiet endurance had been my greatest weapon. Every moment of doubt, every sleepless night, every calculation in the dark, it wasn't wasted. It was preparation. We live in a world where people try to claim what isn't theirs, where ambition becomes cruelty, and where loyalty is tested in ways that feel unbearable. I know what it's like to feel replaced, invisible, and dismissed. I know how easy it is to let anger consume you, to let betrayal define you. But there is a choice. You can scream back. You can retaliate with equal venom, or you can cultivate patience, build strength, and let truth unfold on its own terms. When she first whispered, "He's mine," I felt the collapse of my entire world. I imagined fury, confrontation, revenge through chaos, but I discovered something more profound: control over your own response. He never belonged to her, or even to me. He belonged to his own fears, and eventually to the clarity that comes from honesty. And I belong to peace now. Silence can be louder than any accusation. Calm can dismantle arrogance faster than rage. Observing, documenting, and acting with precision doesn't just bring justice. It preserves your integrity. The satisfaction of victory isn't in watching someone fall. It's in knowing you rose above manipulation, above deceit, and above the temptation to let bitterness rule your life. I think of those watching, anyone who has been dismissed, undervalued, or taken for granted. You don't have to meet cruelty with cruelty. You don't need to match every insult or betrayal. Your patience, your composure, your focus, these are your unseen allies. Every quiet step toward reclaiming your life builds a foundation stronger than any public spectacle. Closure doesn't require gloating. Revenge doesn't require harm. Sometimes it's as simple as reclaiming your time, your voice, and your dignity. It's in the calm reflection at the end of the storm, when the world has shifted and you are still standing. The people who thought they had power over you realized too late that their control was always an illusion. So, remember this: the next time someone claims what isn't theirs, whether it's love, attention, or respect, take a breath, observe, plan, act thoughtfully. Protect your integrity. The most enduring victories are often invisible, quiet, and lasting. I look back now at that 2 a.m. call, that whisper, that moment when my world felt stolen. And I smile quietly. I didn't need to fight with fury. I didn't need to scream. I waited. I watched. I acted. And in doing so, I found something no one could take from me: control over my life, my choices, and my peace. He never belonged to her. He never belonged to me. I belonged to myself, and I belonged to peace.